Welcome back. In my third video, I'll be doing a really common poem. A poem you might have seen before, a poem you might discuss in class before, a poem you might have some preconceived ideas about. The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Now it is a famous poem and has often been read as an ode to unconventional living. Right? Carpe diem. Take your own path. Take the road less traveled, and that has made all the difference. What I want to do today is allow us to look at the poem once again. Read it with fresh eyes. Read it with a renewed perspective. I want to show you that what emerges is ultimately a message that is more unsettling, more ambiguous than what you might have understood about the poem before. So let's begin. Now, Robert Frost begins all his poems in a natural setting. He is very at home with the leaves, with the trees, with the flowers, with the rural background in a lot of his poems. It always starts in an observational stance, and as typical with Frost, it develops into something more, an observation about human nature, human life. So we must pay attention to Frost using an analogy of the road as a depiction of life. In this aspect, it begins conventionally. Two roads diverge in a yellow wood. Now, the road has always been used in literature as a metaphor for the journey of life. You think about the epics of Homer being about journeys back to one's hometown, back to one's country, back to one's family, as a kind of metaphor for the journey of life. Dante's epic, the Divine Comedy, starts with the poet taking a journey through the environs of hell, purgatory, and heaven. So the road as a metaphor, the road as a symbol for the journey of life. Frost begins. Two roads diverge in a yellow wood. So far, so good. We've known the idea of roads and we know the idea of two woods, of course, symbolizing two choices. The poet, the speaker, coming to a juncture, having to choose between two paths, choose between two ways of living. And the idea is, of course, one of divergence, meaning one of forked paths. You can't take both. You have to choose one. The mood goes on. And sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. The speaker starts in an attitude of regret that he can't travel down both roads. We can't live our life twice. Our life is only lived forward and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. The poet starts by looking at the roads and begins with this idea of contemplation. I looked down one as far as I could. So I'm surmising, I'm looking down the path and I'm looking ahead. I'm thinking about the various possibilities. I'm thinking about the various ramifications that could result from me taking on this path to where it bent in the undergrowth. Note, the path isn't straight. Note, the poet has only a limited field of vision. Note, the unsettling idea of the undergrowth. You can't see beyond in the undergrowth. The road bends to somewhere unknown, bends to some kind of future that you can't predict. So the speaker starts with this posture of contemplation. I'm deciding which path to take, and I'm looking down one. I'm looking down maybe at my preferred path, and I'm thinking. Now, of course, one of the great divides in literature is between thought and action. The contemplative life versus the active life. We can think all we want. We can theorize all we want, but ultimately our thoughts must translate into some sort of action. We can't live in our ivory tower. We can't predict all the sorts of consequences of our future actions. As the great Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard says, life can only be lived forward but reason backward. So, the poem continues. The poet chooses the other, then took the other as just as fair. Now he chooses the other road, you might say, from a sort of impulse. He's been looking after all at the previous path and he's been thinking about it. But he chooses the other one as just as fair and having perhaps the better claim. Now there is some sort of judgment being passed now on the paths. The paths on closer inspection don't look equally the same. The poet chooses the other path because it was grassy and wanted wear. So now the conventional reading so far makes sense. Do you go down the well-beaten? Do you go down the well-trodden path? Or do you take the road less traveled? Or do you take the more unconventional route in life? But note, it's done by the speaker on an impulse. It's done, you might say, almost on a sort of whim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. Now note, the speaker doesn't stay on this emotional note for long. The speaker qualifies the statement. Read the poem carefully. Although the less trodden path was grassy, although the less trodden path wanted wear, when the poet has traveled down the path, he looks back and he thinks, really, both paths now look exactly the same. An ode to unconventional living? Think again. Revisit the poem. Look at its language closely. Had warned them really about the same. Now, what's important here is thinking about maybe one of the more important ideas in this poem could be about the inevitability of our choices rather than a kind of joyous celebration of taking the unconventional path. Because really, when the speaker, with the aid of retrospection, looks back at the choice he has made, he thinks about that. Really, both paths are about the same. The passage of time really makes all our choices ultimately seem to us to be the same, seem to us to be equally valid ways of living. Third stanza continues, and both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden back. So now this accentuates the mood of retrospection, looking back in the morning after. Both equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden back. The inevitability of the journey is something highlighted. We can't go back. We can't revisit our decisions. We can't revisit our choices and make them anew. Once we've chosen on the path of life, we go down it. We need to live with the consequences of our decisions. We can't revisit our decisions. We can't revisit our choices. We really have to make do with whatever life throws at us. Of course, this implies this attitude of responsibility. We need to be responsible for our choices. We need to see that that was the choice we originally made and be responsible for what we have done in the past. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Now this tone of regret becomes all the more accentuated with this strong word "oh," right, implying that tone of regret, if you will, right? Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. Now take note, if the speaker really is celebrating the unconventional choice he makes, why then this tone of regret? Why then this tone of wistfulness? Why then this tone of inevitability? I doubted if I ever should come back. Ultimately, Frost's speaker is being overall circumspective about the choice he once makes. And so if you read the language of the poem closely, the ambiguity of the language starts to resonate. The last stanza concludes, I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Note the word sigh. This fits in with the tone of the line in the third stanza. Oh, I kept the first for another day. What does the sigh mean? The sigh of regret? The sigh of wistfulness? The sigh of contentment? I'm not saying that the original reading isn't accurate. I'm saying that the poem's language allows this interplay of ambiguity. So what is the sigh? We are unsure. The more we read the poem, the more we become unsure about really what the poet is feeling at the end of his journey and at the end of the poem. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood. It returns us back to the scenario in the first stanza. And I took the one less traveled by. the language is almost the same, but note the tone has changed. There's a repetition of I, highlighted by the line break, almost a sort of enjambment, highlighted by the hyphen. So again, that hesitancy is emphasized. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. What is the difference? A good difference? A bad difference? A wise choice? A foolish choice? A balance between two choices, of which the one which at the time appeared appealing now seems less so? We aren't sure, and that has made all the difference. Now, again, the poet could be saying this on a note of muted celebration. That has made all the difference to my life. I've chosen the path of unconventionality. I've chosen the road less traveled, and that has made all the difference to my life. But I'm saying with this video, look at the poem again. What is the difference? What is the sigh? Why the more uneasy tone as the poem progresses? Again, the poem's language is ambiguous, and that is the strength of poetic language. It allows different readings to arise. It challenges whatever readings you could have had in the past. With each reading of the poem, a new meaning might emerge. And your job as students is to understand that poetic language allows this multiple play of meanings. What you have to do is to support your interpretation with close reading with the appropriate details from the poem. Two different readings are ultimately okay. What you need to do is to ensure that your chosen reading is a strong reading. In other words, it is based on close reading of the poem. You can extract and explain suitable details, suitable pieces of evidence in order to bolster and support your point. So while there is no difference between reading A and reading B, there is a world of difference between a strong reading and a weak reading. And you should be able to understand what a strong reading consists in and what a weak reading fails to do. So the road not taken, a celebratory poem, a wistful poem, a regretful poem, I leave it up to you. This has been How to Read a Poem. New videos will be posted every Wednesday. Thank you.